Welcome to Unearthed, the World Gold Council podcast on all things gold. My name is John Reade. I'm Senior Market Strategist for Europe and Asia at the World Gold Council.
And I'm Joe Cavatoni, Senior Market Strategist for the World Gold Council in the Americas. We're here in Toronto today at PDAC 2024, the world's largest mineral exploration and mining conference. And we're joined today by George Burns, President and CEO of Eldorado Gold Corporation. George, it's great to have you here today and really looking forward to our conversation.
Well, fantastic to be here with you today.
So a topic that we're hearing a lot about, not only at PDAC, but in the market, is about critical minerals. So maybe we could start by getting your perspective on how critical minerals is on your mind, the company mind, and also what the implications are in different parts of the world, starting maybe with Canada.
Yeah, I mean, for me, being in the mining industry my whole career, this is music to my ears. Fundamentally, all the things we enjoy on this planet that's modern, air conditioning, infrastructure, transportation, communication, none of it's here without minerals. And so the fact that many countries are focused on critical minerals and the importance they play in the modern life we live is music to my ears. In case of our company, we're a gold company, but we do produce other products. We produce lead, zinc, silver, and we're about to become a copper producer, which is clearly one of the critical minerals to deal with heating up of the planet and the energy transition that's right in front of us. So, yeah, I'm happy that countries are recognizing minerals are an important part of the past and the future.
So you're thinking that this is a topic that should probably have been talked about maybe even sooner than it is. Maybe it's just getting the attention now with respect to some of the climate changes that are taking place.
Exactly.
Interesting.
I think also the experience of Russia's invasion of Ukraine has taught politicians that you can't print your way out of a shortage of commodities and materials, and that you really need the flow of these things to make the modern life that we have. Now, there are regional variations in terms of what's considered to be a critical mineral. They're generally related to either economic or national security and, of course, the energy transition as well. The US, Canada, and the European Union don't recognize gold as a critical mineral, although other countries do. In many respects, gold fits many of the criteria of what should be considered to be a critical mineral. What do you think is critical about gold as a commodity?
Well, the first thing I would say, if you look at a lot of major banks across the planet, they're focused on gold and they back their currency with gold. So from a financial perspective, I think it ought to be a critical mineral. And obviously a lot of countries view it that way. I think the flip side of it are many countries want to say their currency is the important factor. So I think it's a bit complicated, but the fact of the matter is gold backs up a heck of a lot of currencies around the planet. And I think it'll continue to be an important part of the financial reality in the world.
Yeah, certainly. One of the big themes we've seen in the gold market in the last 2 years has been a big step up in purchases of gold by central banks. And I think that fits very much with what you're saying.
I would agree. You know, George, one of the things that we've been doing a lot at the council has been spending time educating those in the US, for example, that have set the 4 lists. But we're still focusing on doing more work there. I think that most of what's been setting out the criteria for that list is about dependency on supply. Now, you have operations in Turkey, Greece, and Canada. Maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the dynamic in those markets?
Yeah, I mean, Turkey has got a history of mining. They're interested in growing the gold business. They're a net importer of gold, so they'd like to be producing more gold in country. We discovered 2 gold mines there. We've built the mines. We'll continue to operate them, and we're looking for our 3rd mine. And it's a country that wants gold mining. We just recently reinvested in Kışladağ. We got a 13-year mine life in front of ourselves. But that reinvestment of capital, we had some pretty nice tax incentives that helped drive the investment and the economics around it. So it's a great jurisdiction. It's one that's predictable in terms of getting permitting and operating license. And after 15 years of successful history, we think we've got a long runway in front of us there. Canada, that's our newest jurisdiction from a mining perspective. We acquired a junior exploration company 5 years ago. They had an inferred resource. We were able to convert it to a maiden reserve and put it into commercial production 2 years after we purchased it. And we're celebrating our 5th anniversary of commercial production this quarter, actually. Very mature mining jurisdiction. I'd say it's one of the best jurisdictions on the planet. You really can understand what you need to do to get a mine permitted and built. There's a lot of experienced miners in Quebec, and the government has incentives, and it's a great jurisdiction. And we're looking for our second mine in Canada. We've got a toehold into a junior exploration company. We're trying to replicate what we did at the Lamaque mine. And Canada, I think, is a jurisdiction that's got a good reputation globally, and we export our expertise to build mines in other jurisdictions. In Greece, Greece, we're the only metal mining company in the country. And we've got a really good runway in front of us. So we have the Olympias underground mine. We produce gold, silver, lead, and zinc from this mine. We produce concentrates that are exported across the planet for further processing. Right now we're building the Skouries project. It's roughly half gold, half copper from a revenue perspective. One of the cool things over the last few years in the EU is they also are now focused on critical minerals. Copper's on that list. It's strategic mineral. Energy transformation and decarbonization is really a big issue in the EU. And so we're providing copper for that transformation. They've set targets to increase production within the EU as well as smelting capacity within the EU. So our timing is really perfect in terms of bringing Skouries into commercial production over the next 2 years. And it's a game changer asset for us. The copper byproducts will pay all the operating and sustaining costs. So the gold's free cash flow. We have a negative $6 all-in sustaining cost per ounce coming out of this asset. And it's got a 20-year mine life. So it'll be an important supplier of copper to the EU and a really important generator of value for our company.
All-in sustaining costs was a initiative led by the World Gold Council to attempt to standardize the costs across the gold mining industry. Previously, mining companies used different definitions of costs, which weren't really comprehensive. But all-in sustaining costs is an attempt to include all the costs that are associated with mining gold. So cash costs, sustaining capex, general and administrative costs are all included in this. What is excluded, though, is expansionary capex. So in other words, capital expenditure that's used to expand capacity of an operation or open a new part of it.
So when you speak about the EU, do you think they understand the dynamic of how your copper mine and the yield of gold that it brings to the market? Do they make that connection? Do you think they really appreciate that it's not just an exclusive asset that comes out of a mine?
I think that's a growing understanding, but I think EU's in an evolution where they were fine for metals to be brought into the country and into the EU, but now they do understand they got to protect their future by having a source of their raw materials. And so I think it's a jurisdiction that's going to grow in terms of mines and smelters. And for us, we're the only one in Greece, so we've got an early advantage to everybody else.
So gold plays very heavily into the economic security arguments, particularly if we think of the benefit that it brings to local communities. Based on our research, in 2022, World Gold Council members contributed $58 billion to host economies. And our members employed 360,000 workers and contractors, each of those workers supporting somewhere between 6 and 10 additional jobs. Now, Eldorado has some concrete examples of where gold mining can really help in this regard. Do you want to touch on some of those?
Yeah, we got some great examples of how mining has a positive impact on local communities and local governments and federal governments. So I'd say one of the coolest mines on the planet that I've ever seen is our FM Çukurova mine in Turkey. Now, this is an underground mine. We built this mine over a decade ago in a rural area where they were farming for table grapes, basically. And, in our industry, people that don't want mines pick on us and went into local communities and said we disrupt their way of life. And to be honest, the communities were in fear about a mine coming in and disrupting their way of life. We took a patient way forward. One of the first things we did is help them with schooling. because this local rural community, many of the kids didn't graduate from high school. There were no schools right in the community. They had to be bused elsewhere. And so we began by investing in their kids, providing supplies for kids, ultimately building schools to educate youngsters. And today, if you look at the last 2 years, we actually have programs where we incentivize kids to come work at the mine and get an advantage on learning about mining as they continue their education. And many of these kids now work for us. In fact, the local people that were growing grapes are now our miners and our plant operators, and they still have their business. When we put the vineyards in place, all the locals basically were growing table grapes right on the ground. And what we did is we trellised the grapes off the ground, and you get higher yield in the grapes.
Right.
And we turn those grapes into wine, and we sell a wine in country. And what that did for the local communities is to prove to them a vineyard can sit right next to a dry stack tailings facility, and there's no adverse impacts. We created jobs, and we demonstrated that farming, agriculture, mining can go in harmony with one another. And when we started up the mine, we started up with experienced miners from across Turkey. But those people are now gone, and the locals have been trained to be our miners. And I would tell you they're our strongest advocate. They now know the real benefits that have come into their community, the jobs and prosperity it's brought to their families, the educational opportunities it brought to their kids. You know, we now have one of our underground supervisors was a young girl when we were building the mine. She's a mining engineer. She worked as an engineer, and she's now in the field leading our miners. So, yeah, mining definitely can have a dramatic positive impact on local communities. And, you know, we got to get our story out to everybody to understand there's lots of positive benefits that come. Maybe spinning to our newest project, the Skouries project that's under full construction in Greece. I mean, this is going to have 800 new jobs, high-paying jobs in Greece. There's 5,000 direct and indirect jobs that will be created as a result of this business.
Right.
There's $3 billion in US dollars in capital investment that's happening over the 20-year mine life. And, you know, I can just tell you, we've had a great big impact on the local communities already. Our Olympias mine is about an hour and a half drive away from Skouries. And this particular mine has had a dramatic impact on the communities because the mines of the past, when we didn't have all the environmental controls we have today, caused impacts. Mm-hmm. So there was actually a Greek fertilizer company that started the Olympias underground mine decades ago. And they were extracting the rock, making fertilizer, but unfortunately there was acid rock drainage in the waste materials that they mined, and there was also metals that they weren't recovering. And those were placed on the ground next to a river. To get our social license in these local communities, we invested $100 million, in excess of $100 million, basically to clean up those tailings. So we built a triple line facility. Right. Where we then deposited these materials, arsenopyrite waste, arsenic, and tailings are now in this facility under control, and we're rehabilitating the ground that was once contaminated. What that did is prove to local communities that mining can be a good neighbor. We've cleaned up things of the past, and we're operating and constructing our mines in a very sustainable way.
Yeah, I think that's something that's misunderstood. I've been involved in quite a few projects which are very similar, where you've had historic mining that has left a really big mess environmentally. And if the permits are approved for a new operation, you clean all the historic stuff up at the same time. I don't think that's really understood enough by NGOs and sometimes regulators as well.
Completely agree.
I think you're really giving our audience the opportunity to understand that just simply thinking about some of the narrow criteria that put metals on a list for critical right now at sovereign levels, it's good, but it could be so much better. And it could be so much better understood because of the broader implications. Now, personally, I'm very intrigued by this whole new dimension to a gold label wine that could come from Turkey. I'd love to be able to take a tour of that site.
I think we need to go and test that ourselves. But look,
so.
it's not just wine that obviously benefits from gold mining. I mean, we're sitting in a room here surrounded by cameras. Every electronic component in this room contains gold. It's not massive in terms of its contribution to gold demand. Out of a 5,000 ton market, more or less, technology demand is about 300 tons a year. But if we didn't have gold in technology, then everything that we rely on, our mobile phones, these cameras, would be bigger, heavier, and would break much more frequently. I think electronics demand for gold, we've all seen the photographs of chips looking, really beautifully gold, but I don't think we quite understand the advantages that gold brings to us.
Do you think that if gold were to be added to the list in Canada, it could help with a topic that's really pronounced here at PDAC, which is really funding for some of these small operations? Do you think the incentives that are around the list?
Yeah, I think there's a definite challenge going on right now. I mean, although gold's at a record price today,
Yeah.
funding for junior exploration companies that are going to find the deposits of the future and the mines of the future is virtually unavailable. And with the lack of development and exploration, there's going to be challenges coming forward. So we can talk about critical minerals. If there's not ore bodies that have been discovered, it takes 5 to 10 years to find, permit, and construct a mine. So we got to be in the front end of it. And so definitely, I think, to your point about gold, it is used in high-end electronic devices. It's used in the medical industry. Out in BC, there's a new technology the last 2 years where little beads of gold are being put to help in fighting breast cancer. I think fundamentally it is an important mineral in a lot of aspects, including the financial backing of many banks across the world. So for sure, making it an important critical mineral will help in funding and developing new mines that are going to be necessary to meet the demands in the future.
And thinking about the future, you've got vast experience in this sector. Get your crystal ball out and think what the next 10, 20 years is going to be for gold mining and gold as a critical mineral, gold's use in various aspects. What do you see the future for this industry?
I mean, the first thing I'd say is that we're going to get better and smarter with technology, with the controls we have on environmental and safety. And over my multiple decades across the industry, and from a family of miners, I've seen our industry improve. And I've always tried to attach myself to companies that are on the progressive end, looking to improve the industry.
Right.
And I know over the next 10, 20, 30 years, we're going to get better and better at what we do. In terms of the uses for gold, I mean, it's one of the best conductors of electricity. It's expensive, so it's used in, the extreme cases where it can be justified. But in phones and high-end electronics, gold is used, and like I said, a new use in the medical industry. I'm sure as the future unfolds, it's going to be one of those commodities that'll be part of high-end technology.
And I think as a consequence, I think gold's position as a critical mineral needs to be recognized more broadly. There are some countries already that have made that recognition, whether it's China, Japan, but I think the global industry can recognize or should recognize that gold is critical both in terms of its applications, but in terms of its impact on the communities where it's mined responsibly.
In the U.S., we have a lot of engagement at government levels, and they recognize that monetary role that gold plays globally. And they see it, they understand it. It's really just making sure that they make that connection between the significance of its role and actually the need for not only understanding where mining might benefit from critical minerals, but also upstream in terms of the production process, like the refining process. If they were to start to expand their understanding there, they might see another lens for which they could actually start to understand what criteria might be appropriate to put onto critical minerals as well, right? So seeing the value monetarily, seeing the value mining, seeing the value from a production perspective as well, and getting a much bigger, broader picture. I think it's on us to continue to do that education.
I agree with that. And I think when you look at the major economies of the world, the currency debate between those various economies is going to get larger and larger. And I just see over time, gold playing a bigger role in terms of backing up these currencies. And I think if you look back in time, gold has been the currency that's been there the longest. So I don't see it going away. I see it gaining importance.
Yeah, so certainly a conversation we're hearing now, much more so in the last 6 to 12 months, about the sustainability of government debt stocks and deficits, both in the United States and beyond there. I think you're right. I think we're going to come back to these conversations again about gold as the ultimate store of value.
One last question on critical minerals from me. Do you see any shift? Because there have been some shifts on ESG standards, ESG attitudes, the speed with which EVs, for example, have been embraced and then slowed down a bit. Do you see any view on critical minerals maybe stepping back a bit, or do you see a shift potentially over time, or is that just too hard to tell at this stage?
I don't know, just from living in Canada and in North America, I'd say infrastructure is the challenge. I've got an electric car.
Right.
It is a great vehicle to drive around Vancouver where I live, but and it's a difficult vehicle if I want to go to Seattle on a trip, trying to find places to connect it. And they're out there, but half of them don't work. And so I don't know, I think the infrastructure's got to catch up. And I mean, Tesla did a good job of putting infrastructure for their vehicle, but go buy another electric car and try to find charging stations. And
Well,
I think if governments want us to go electric, they're going to have to help support the infrastructure that any car can find, quote, a gas station or a plug-in wherever they need it. And so, I think there's a lot more to be done to get energy where we all want it to go, and infrastructure is going to play a role in that. And the minerals we need to do all that have to be there.
Sure.
I'm with you on the EV. I have an EV too. It's an adventure vehicle, and I'm so frightened to take it 100 miles away from my house for fear of it dying on its adventure and then have to walk home. So I figured the 100-mile limit's my limit for walking. I can get an Uber at that point.
I suspect this is not the last time we're going to talk about the energy transition and Joe's adventure electric vehicle.
Lack of.
Or lack of, exactly. But look, George, I'd like to thank you very much on behalf of the World Gold Council for this conversation today. I found it really interesting to hear your perspective on critical minerals.
I think we have a fun fact segment of the podcast that we like to ask people. Just open up with some fun fact about gold that we like to leave our audience with. Anything on your mind, John, that you want to start with?
I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think about the most interesting gold mine I've ever visited. I've been to a few. I've been to a few in Turkey as well, although not one of yours, George. But to me, the most interesting mine I visited was Kumtor in Kyrgyzstan, up at 4,000 meters with glaciers all over the place, and truly an interesting experience to travel there. You've visited a couple of mines as well, haven't you?
I have. I've actually probably been to one of the highest mines in the world, if not the highest mine in the world, in Tibet with China Gold, and it was an experience to say the least. But what I would say my fun fact is that I've actually put the question into my EV manufacturer as to how much gold is in my vehicle as I try to determine how much I should sell it for in the secondary market.
Well, my fun fact, I spent a lot of time at Kumtor. I was a chief operating officer and did the IPO on Centerra. Worked there for 5 years. So, but my fun fact for Eldorado is at our Skouries project again. So Skouries is a copper porphyry deposit, and it outcrops right on surface. And one of the things we had to do to be able to develop this mine, we had to excavate this large area. I'm going to say it was about 60 feet by 60 feet of clay that is by archaeologists determined to be a pot that Alexander the Great was pouring metal from the outcrop of the Skouries deposit. So we had to go in and excavate around this clay pot and put a bunch of piles under it and lift it up and move it away from the pit so that it could be seen later by others.
That's incredible. I had no idea. That's something I must come and have a look at sometime.
George, it's been great. Again, thank you for joining us today.
Appreciate it. It's great to be with you.
And you can find this podcast and others where you find all your podcasts. So thanks for joining us on Unearthed today.
Thanks, guys.